Good evening. Welcome to our program. Thank you so much for being here with us. This evening, this is the Smart Elections Election Protection Forum, but we're taking a special time to celebrate our friend and a trusted advisor, the Reverend Dr. T. Anthony Spearman. He was somebody who was extremely courageous and really understood the relationship between the civil rights community and the election security community, and took very strong action in both communities. So we really respect him and honor his memory. He died in July of last year. Do you want to say anything, Bennie?
No, I'll hold mine for when I speak. Love Dr. Spearman. He was a great man.
And am I echoing a little bit?
You're not.
Okay, that's great. We should introduce ourselves and do visual descriptions. The visual descriptions that we do are for those with visual impairments. I'm Lulu Friesdat. I'm the executive director and co-founder of Smart Elections. I am a pale woman with long brown hair in front of a brick wall and a tiger eye necklace tonight. Bennie?
Bennie Smith, Shelby County Election Commissioner and Technical Advisor for Smart Elections. I'm a full-on black dude, low hair, with I don't know what this is. It's a white stripe, white shirt with some stripes in it.
Okay. And if you do want the closed captions, they're available on Facebook. If you go to Facebook, there are instructions in Facebook for how to turn your closed captions on if you don't know. And I think with that, we are just going to get started. And our first guest this evening is the Reverend Dr. Allison Lee, who's with the AME Zion Church in Greensboro, North Carolina, where Dr. Spearman was a member. And it's a pleasure to have you with us here, Dr. Lee. Thank you so much.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me on this evening. I'd like to share, if it's okay, a few words about Dr. Spearman, somebody that I have looked up to for a long time. And I will say that the way that I know him is through the AME Zion Church, first through the church generally, and then most recently at the Trinity AME Zion Church, where both he and I served. We're here tonight to honor and remember the life and legacy of Dr. Spearman. And I think when many people think about Dr. Spearman, they're reminded of the work that he did, right? I'm sure we'll hear about it on this evening in political, social justice arenas across the state. They're reminded of the work that he carried out pertaining to pushing for and ultimately obtaining the pardoning of those with prison sentences, reminded of his passion for equity, his knack for shining a light on truths that others they struggle to see, reminded of his strong yet gentle voice, his loud but calming voice, his certain but open-minded voice. Some people will think of Dr. Spearman on this evening and recall the man of God that he was. They'll think of how he stood tall and spoke with candor, love, and pureness of heart from the pulpit. And when it came to the things of God, love of neighbor and salvation, we'll all be reminded of words of encouragement that he shared down through the years, of his kindness, of his passion. When the name T. Anthony Spearman comes to my mind, I certainly think of all of those things. I think of the work that he's done. I think of the encouragement that he's given. The things that I think most about would be the time that he freely gave to me, to others, but especially to me, and to his presence. Whenever Dr. Spearman and I would see each other, he would always say, "Hey, sweetheart, fill me in." And at that point, I would tell him all about what was new in my world, what I was working on, what my hopes and dreams were. And he would stand there patiently, y'all. A man with the weightiest mantle I've ever known, with people pulling at him from every direction. He would stand there patiently with the biggest smile and hold complete and total uninterrupted space with me. And he would just listen. When I was done talking, he would ask questions to clarify, and he'd always challenge me to keep my hand to the plow. And every time when we finished talking, he'd say, "Just keep doing the work. Just keep doing the work. You are already doing the work." And from time to time, he would ask me my thoughts on matters that honestly were too big for words. And when I shared with him, we would talk back and forth, and he'd say, "Thank you for helping me." Dr. Spearman was present. He was present when he could have been, and maybe even should have been, anywhere and everywhere else. And that is something I remember him for. And there's one more thing in particular when I think of Dr. Spearman. He has always been, and currently is now especially a reminder of how precious time is. It's hard to believe, and also it makes sense, the amount of time that has passed since Dr. Spearman has last been with us on this earth. And I've been thinking quite a bit about how time is present and accounted for one day, and seemingly the next it slipped through your fingers, maybe like sand on a windy day at the beach. Dr. Spearman for me is a reminder that time, the time we have with each other, the time we have to make a difference, it's an invaluable asset in relation to where we spend it and whom we spend it to. Time is a thing that we devote, most people, between 62, right, and 67 years of our lives striving to gain after having hopefully worked as a contributing member of society, right? Dr. Spearman's a reminder for me that time is precious, because when you have it to freely use and just be, prayerfully, every minute of it is enjoyed, basked in, and appreciated when you're doing what you love. When time is lacking and we desire it, though, we spend these moments wishing to get time back, or thinking about how things could be different if only we had more time. Dr. Spearman is a reminder to me that time is a complex duality, as I've been thinking about him over this last week, especially, that demands we both be present in the here and now, which he was able to do so tastefully, while also making preparations for the future. I've been thinking, with what feels like Dr. Spearman leaving us so suddenly, is time on our side, right? Are we using our time wisely here? Because he was someone that showed us each by example how to do that. Are we building lives that we'll be able to look back on years from now and rest knowing that, like Dr. Spearman, we gave it our all? C.S. Lewis has these words that say, day by day, nothing changes, but when you look back, everything is different. And I'm realizing that, in the words of late John Lewis, time is a good and a necessary trouble. Time for all that she's not. Time is difficult. Time is hard, but helps us to assess our action, our reflection, and our action. I think about that when I think of Dr. Spearman. When I think of him, I think of time in this fragility on one side, and also the joy of life. It's a reminder for all of us on this evening, hopefully, that we can remain aware of the reliably precarious concept of time, that we're using it in a way that benefits our hands, the way that Dr. Spearman did. And also that we're reminded that, and this is hard to say, but that it's not the length of time that matters, but what we do with our time that makes a difference. And as I'm closing, and when I think of Dr. Spearman, all I hear, like, repeatedly over and over in his voice, right, is forward together, not one step back, forward together, not one step back. I'm grateful for the person that he was and the legacy that he has left behind. And as I stop and I'm thinking about time and I'm thinking about his presence, I'm reminded, I'm touched deeply by his life, but also reminded that we have to continue on in the words that he always said, forward together, not one step back. Thank you.
That was incredibly beautiful. So moving. Dr. Lee, thank you so much. I think that it would be really great just to hear some words from Dr. Spearman now. I have a clip queued up of when he testified before Congress. He was actually asked to testify at the election security hearings because he was an expert on that issue. And I think that's really important to our work. We work with security and accessibility and inclusion, but certainly the security component. And as I said, bridging those communities between voting rights and election security. And he was a key bridge builder. So I think let's go ahead. I'm going to take us out if I can. I think I know how to do that. And we're going to listen to this clip.
Spearman, we'd love to hear from you.
Good afternoon, Chair Lofgren, Ranking Member Davis, and committee members. I am indeed honored to be here, for unlike the previous participants on these panels, I am neither a voting systems vendor nor an expert. I'm an activist, one who was raised in a household where the vote was held sacred. I'm the president of the North Carolina State Conference of Branches of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and the only County Board of Elections member of color from Guilford County, North Carolina. And while not an expert in election security, I rely on the findings of those scientists who are, and urge my colleagues on county boards across the nation to do so as well. We must listen to scientists, not vendor marketing claims. Dr. Duncan Buell, along with others, has studied how voting machines and their allocation can create lines that frustrate and disenfranchise voters. Let me hasten to say that I am not anti-technology, but I agree with the scientists who argue that election security can be compromised by placing an electronic device between a voter and the ballot. While the election security defenses needed to detect and stop cyber attacks may seem impossibly complex and overwhelming, there's a practical, low-tech, traditional answer to mitigating the greatest threats, assuring that any attacks can be detected and cannot be ultimately achieved or effective. That's where I come in. I was first elected to the Guilford County Board of Elections in 2017 for a 2-year term and re-elected in January of 2019 for another 2-year term. In Guilford County, iVotronics, or direct recording electronics, DREs, were in use, and among my growing concerns while serving the precinct were problems that arose with the touchscreen or iVotronic devices. I was the chief overseer of the 6th highest voter precinct in Guilford County with 3,800 voters. As one of my friends has convinced me that the first line of defense is the local county bipartisan election board, like the one I sit on in Guilford County, North Carolina. Across the nation, they are authorities for selecting voting systems and reviewing the ballot tabulations before they certify the election results. I'm talking first line of defense. Elections belong to the people, and the more the people are included in the process, the more we may gain their trust and confidence. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Thank you very much.
And that was Dr. Spearman testifying on January 9th, 2020 in the congressional hearings that they had on election security. And our next guest, Perry Busby, is an election security journalist who knew Dr. Spearman. And it's
good evening.
to have you here.
Well, thank you, Lulu, and thank all of you who have taken time out of your busy schedules to come together to remember a great human being. Above all, Dr. Spearman. I did not know Dr. Spearman personally. I am the son and grandson of Baptist preachers. And for a brief moment in my career, I worked full-time for a ministry and did evangelism work. And so it is in that evangelism work that I think in the early 90s that it brought me to the Winston-Salem area, where I met a young preacher at that time who has become a real good friend and is now a state senator in North Carolina, Senator Paul Lowe. And it is through Senator Lowe that I began to hear of the work of Dr. Spearman. And I don't, Dr. Lee summed up Dr. Spearman's life so eloquently, and I won't dare touch that. But I guess what I would say is that being the son of a preacher who was able to captivate a community in some regard, and Dr. Spearman surely captivated his surrounding community and many communities above throughout North Carolina and this nation. But to do that comes at a great price to something that you also love, and pastors who love their families. You often see that sacrifice that while the community is calling, it takes away from the very essence of family. And I continue to pray for his wife and his children, because when you have someone who has a legacy that is so huge, it causes quite an adjustment. But I would also dare say that it's not just for Dr. Spearman's family, it is for the community at whole. Dr. Spearman represents, in some cases, in my estimation, an era of the Black church that is quickly eroding. Well, I won't say it's eroding, it's changing and evolving around a Black community that is also now disparate in many ways. And so the Black church finds itself in a precarious position as it relates to elections and what is considered its community. But I think Dr. Spearman really was prophetic in the work that he did. Again, I don't want to go back into the, nitty gritty of the history of the Black church, but, there was a time in the Black church after Dr. King left that in many ways the Black church was trying to find itself. You had people like Jesse Jackson who was extending Dr. King's vision in some regard. You had Reverend Sharpton and many others. But, when you looked at the Black community, there was always those anchor pastors within the community, Reverend Barber among those, who began to lift a community that saw itself, one, under attack from the crack epidemic, being gentrified. And you have these preachers of the gospel who are there to preach the good news. And I dare say that if there is any scripture that epitomizes Dr. Spearman's life, it is Luke 4:17. That says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel, the good news to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. And I don't know about any of you, but that is this time. We have a society that now questions truth and now views some are distorted. But you see someone like Dr. Spearman who works through these differences and begins to weave a network of community. I dare say his work, even before his work with the LGBT community, he was at the forefront of women pastors within the Black community, which was a struggle that the Black church does not really talk about as much, but it was a very relevant struggle as early as 30 years ago. And Pastor Spearman was among those who were advocating for women to have a place and a place in leadership within the church. Dr. Lee can definitely speak to that. But again, his work on voting, I find it admirable. And yes, I think his shoes will be hard to fill from a from the theological standpoint and pastors understanding the intricacies of voting. But I remember Pastor Spearman in a statement that I read, and he made a statement, and it was regarding Proverbs 4:7. And it has stayed with me, and I close with this: in all you're getting, get an understanding. In 60 years, we as the African American community have tried to hold this gift of voting that was fought and bled and died for. And I dare say that in some ways we've understood the power of our voting, and we've seen it sometimes in terms of our ability to vote as a bloc and to change the landscape of voting. But what Dr. Spearman was looking at in terms of voting was not just to make sure we are included, but as Bennie can attest to, I'm sure, that we need to understand the mechanics of voting. And if we want to understand voting, we've got to get an understanding from the very core level. And I leave you with that. And I thank Dr. Spearman for being among our leaders to help lead this.
Thank you so much, Perry. I do think it would be great, because you are an election security journalist, if you would just say a word about what you think can help bridge those communities, the voting rights community and the election security community. Because as I said, Dr. Spearman was one of the key pillars of that bridge, and it breaks my heart personally that he's gone, but it is also a real loss. I hate to think that bridge would be, weaker now and even collapsing without such the strong support that he was providing.
Yeah. Looking at Dr. Spearman, and it's it's what you have begun, and I think that as we sometimes look at what we are doing as grassroots, we must understand that there are levels lower that we need to begin to network with and begin to understand. It is not enough to tell those within the community to vote, just vote. I have this analogy. From the time you are conceived, politics tells you how long you can stay in the hospital. You leave the hospital and go to a home where your parents have their politics and they tell you the politics, and you live in a society where it tells you about your education, it tells you about your religion. And then somehow, miraculously, when we get 18, someone says, oh, you have a choice in this. What an oxymoron to tell me when everything has been told to me. And so now that I've got to come to this grasp that I've got a choice, it's not just a choice, it's a total understanding. I talk about growing up, my family. I can't play Monopoly because my oldest sister read the instructions and she wielded the rules to her authority. And I think that's what happens in our communities. And Dr. Spearman, I think to a greater extent, began to weave beyond those differences. And that is what we've got to get beyond.
Right. He was really an intersectional thinker. He wasn't somebody who worked in silos. He understood all of that connective tissue.
Right.
So, and I think we'll go to Lynn next, because I know, Lynn, you worked with him personally in Guilford County. And so we're going to give you the stage and let you talk about your work with him.
Great. Thank you so much, Lulu, for doing this. I feel like not enough has been said about Dr. Spearman. I feel like everyone who never got to know him or know his work, I just want everyone to know him and know what an amazing person he was and what amazing advocate he was. I met Dr. Spearman in 2019 when North Carolina was considering getting certain voting machines that Dr. Spearman realized could be used to disenfranchise voters in some ways that weren't really apparent before. I met him, Bennie Smith and John Brakey introduced him to me because they were working with him and teaching him about, the systems and how they could be used to disenfranchise voters. One of the things that I just so admired about Dr. Spearman was that he really tried to affect change using compassion and conviction and competence. the competence part was something that most boards of elections members didn't have, right? I remember going to one meeting and the board was just clueless about these machines, and they but Dr. Spearman, he had done his homework and he really understood it. So periodically I would call him because this work is sometimes discouraging, and he would always say, just like Reverend Lee said, he would always say, we've got to move forward together, not one step back. We have to keep moving forward together. And he would always tell me to keep making good trouble, which I did, and I'm still doing. One of the projects that we were working on together, and we didn't have a chance to complete together, but I am continuing on with that project, was that Dr. Spearman was concerned about the voting equipment and sort of the testing of the voting equipment and where those resources were allocated, because he was concerned that the voter suppression would not stop, right? Once people would want to suppress your vote, would want to suppress the voter, right? They would do everything they could to suppress the voter, create long lines, maybe by putting fewer machines in some locations versus others, voter ID, all sorts of things to use to suppress voters. And then he believed, and I think he was spot on, that there are people who would want to then suppress the vote itself. And I know Bennie will probably talk more about that and how the vote itself can be suppressed, even if you're putting all of these, blocks in people's way. Some people fight so hard just to vote and have fought to vote. And then when that vote happens, we want to make sure that that vote is counting how it's supposed to be done. So the project that we're continuing, that my organization, Transparent Elections, NC, is still working on, is that we're trying to catalog all of the equipment in Guilford County. That's where we're starting, and then we'll branch out and maybe do the whole state. But we're cataloging all the equipment, the testing of it, making sure that it's equal where these machines get distributed. We don't want a bunch of machines in one area where, you're no one's waiting in line, and then there's no machines in another area and people are waiting in line. And then also, the equipment, is it good equipment? Is it equipment that maybe shouldn't be put out into the election that day? And so, that's something that we're going to continue working on moving forward. But I think what I'll say is that, Dr. Spearman, he was so many things to so many people. But I think he always made everyone who he talked to feel special and feel like help push them forward and be an advisor of how to sort of affect change in a very strange political world here that we have in North Carolina. He's deeply missed, and but his work is going to continue on. I know it will through everyone who he's touched.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And I think next we're going to have Bennie give some remarks, and I'll just we can show a few comments that people have made. Emily Levy is here. His passing has been such a huge loss, and Kelly Lane also here. Both of them very strong voting advocates. So sad, and I really do miss him. So we're going to have Bennie, and then I'll rotate the people who can be on the side listening. It gets a little bit too crowded if everybody's on, but it gives us all an opportunity just to share in the person's remarks. So I think, Bennie, we'd love to hear from you, and I know that you also worked with Dr. Spearman.
Yes, I did. Thanks. Oh man, Reverend Dr. T. Anthony Spearman, he's such a light bearer, but more importantly, Dr. Spearman got it. He's some people get it and some people don't. That's one thing I can say about Dr. Spearman. He got it, and I got to rep one thing that he was so proud of. He was a proud Omega. He was from the mighty 6th district. You're gonna see him with that Omega hat on. It's gonna be pulled down tight. and he was going to wear it with a suit. But for me as a young black man growing up in some troubling times in the 90s, he was a personification of Black excellence. There is something that we say in the Black community where we are really striving, and that's like a no jeans Friday. Try to make sure that you dot all your I's and cross all your T's. And Spearman was one of the personifications of pure Black excellence. He was always well dressed. You were always going to see him in a really postured, clean. He was always cleanly shaved, and he would rock those bow ties. I can't wear a bow tie, but there was something that was so unique about him. But he sat between two eras, right? He was a thought leader in both, right? I know when I first met him, he was talking about North Carolina and Woolworth and all of the problems that happened in North Carolina. And he was on the civil rights end of it. He was also a member of the clergy, but then he waded into our world, into elections, and he had the collage. He could bring all of those pieces together. I always say that analysis is understanding how all the parts relate to the whole, but he had all of the parts embedded in his wisdom. So when he took our issue on, he knew how it affected, generations and years and decades of voter suppression and civil rights struggles, because a lot of what the struggles were about the right to vote. So he had all of that ingrained in his psyche. So when we brought the last half to him, he was so attentive. And I remember I met him through John Brakey, and John was like, "Hey, I got this guy in North Carolina, Bennie. I need you to blow me some kisses." I'm a white guy trying to come in his town, and I need to lean on you so that you tell this guy I'm good, so that I can come down to his city. And I met Dr. Spearman first over email, and I blew John his kisses, and he said, "I want to meet this young guy." And he told John, he said, "When you come, you got to bring him too." So that's how I got to meet him in person. And I never forget, we went to breakfast, and Reverend Dr. Allison Lee, she said it, he was present, right? There was he had an aura, like he was so present and intentional, like the way he spoke, almost like he's sitting in front of an angel. Like he was sitting there, and John's phone kept ringing. He was like, "We're gonna wait on your phone to stop, brother." Like he made John like, "You gotta hang up the phone. We get ready to have breakfast." So he was so intentional, and like he used his time so well. He was always positive. And his wisdom just exuded from him. And he always, like Lynn said, he was always talking about getting in good trouble. I remember going to his house to educate him on how election equipment worked, because he was like, "Look, I want to understand this. Like when I vote, I want to have it. I want to have all the angles. I want to understand it all." And I remember sitting at his house, me and him and Brakey, and we were workshopping him on like some really, when I talk about some of this election technical stuff, it's really complex, but he got it. And he was like, he would digest it in such a way that I was like, wow, he is a fast learner. I thought we was going to take a minute, but he was really good at it. And he really wanted to know how the election equipment worked. And, he started telling me just some of the civil rights struggles and how he was the successor to Reverend Dr. Barber. He showed me like a picture in his house of him hugging Dr. Barber and how close they were. And just, if a young kid, that's out in another state, giving me a lot of knowledge. He hooked me up with my local NAACP leaders. He knew most of the people in my county. And when it was my turn to deal with election integrity, he would call me like once a week. Like, "Hey, brother, keep the fight. Like, I'm just checking on you, seeing how you're doing." He was always positive. Like, he always exuded this, like Lynn said, competence. Like he really got it. And I almost felt like I was learning from him. I was, but, not with the election technical stuff, but he would, he matriculated so fast that he became an advisor when I was going through my struggles, because he was trying to tell me how to keep myself at bay. Because it's rough, but he, like she said, he would lead with compassion. Like he would be such a disarming presence, where it's mostly confrontational when you deal with election integrity. So he was more of a disarming presence, where you weren't going to rattle him. If you guys seen his speech when he was in Congress, like he nailed almost every corner of of the angles that you would try to use to derail his argument. So he was a consummate chess player. He would lay all his pieces out. But that's that wisdom that you just cannot get it unless you come through the era where you had to learn it. But in closing, I would just like to thank his family for loaning him to us through the movement, because this is rough work. And he came in and he didn't shy away from it. And I'm going to miss him for that.
Thank you so much, Bennie. Thank you. Just a wonderful, wonderful memory of him. And I think let's listen to Reverend Barber there was a beautiful celebration of life for him in August after he passed. And Reverend Barber had quite a speech there. And I just took a couple minutes of it.
Sent Spearman to be at the tip of the spear. T. Anthony Spearman was a spearman, willing to go in and make a difference, to open up ways, to pierce through injustice and do holy damage and exposure to evil. When children needed an advocate in Hickory, he was on the school board at the tip of the spear. When I led the NAACP to take on the biggest lawsuit against modern-day voter suppression tactics, he and his congregation joined as plaintiffs at the tip of the spear. We joined the fight for Dante Sharp in 2015 when I had to step down to serve repairs of the breach in the Poor People's Campaign. He took his position alongside the lawyers and served as a fierce and diligent advocate to not only free Dante, but to pardon him. He led a 70-day protest, day and night, 24 hours in front of the governor's mansion until full pardon came. He was at the tip of the spear until the day he died. He was at the tip of the spear. He was challenging discriminatory election laws no matter which party pushed him. He was preparing that day for an election board meeting to advocate for the restoration of a voter precinct at A&T University that would serve as an example for the other colleges and boards of election around the country. He was always at the tip of the spear. He was just trying to be where God had thrown him, on this earth, to make an opening for justice and love for everybody else to come on through.
That was
Wow.
very strong there. We wanted to bring John Brakey on also John worked with him in North Carolina, but John, it's telling me that your mic and camera have to be connected before I can bring you on. So I can't bring you on unless I would say go out and come back in and see if you can connect your camera and your mic, because I would love to have John speak also. John worked with him quite a bit, and they have, I know, really good times together doing that good trouble. So hopefully John will do that and come back. So I just thought we can take a little time to, to talk here about and share our memories with each other. And I'll start it off. And then I also do want to talk a little bit about what the findings were about his death and what's happening now with his family and friends and the community in regard to his death, because there was some announcements that came out, and I think many of us have some pretty strong feelings about it. So we'll share some memories, then we'll talk a little bit about that. The way that Dr. Spearman got involved with us at Smart Legislation, which is our partner organization to Smart Elections, is that we have a pretty tough battle here in New York where we are trying to keep hand-marked paper ballots, and we've had hand-marked paper ballots for the last 10 years, along with ballot marking devices, and we've had a really good system where voters could choose whichever one they wanted. But there are voting machines coming into the state that are potentially going to make it so that you don't have that hand-marked paper ballot option anymore, and everybody would vote on a computerized touchscreen machine. And some of them even encode the vote in a barcode, which is just considered an election security danger. There's all kinds of vulnerabilities in barcodes. They can be programmed to vote for the candidate that you didn't vote for. And there's no way for you to verify that. There's no way for you to look at a barcode and know how your vote is going to be counted. And Dr. Spearman understood that. And unfortunately, the one organization in New York that was supporting these electronic computerized systems for everybody with barcodes was the New York NAACP. And it's been really tough because obviously we respect the legacy of the NAACP and have tremendous admiration for them. And they've done so much good work. But on this particular issue in New York State, it was really an outlier issue because Lynn will attest to the fact that in North Carolina, the NAACP was on the opposite side of the issue. And they were fighting for a combination of hand-marked paper ballots and ballot marking devices. So we were really just really concerned and upset that the New York NAACP was taking this problematic position. And, you know, I reached out to Dr. Spearman. I knew that he had been a former president of the North Carolina NAACP, and I didn't know what his response would be. And he did not shirk away from it for a minute. He didn't try to be politic or, you know, dodge any type of statement. He gave us a full-on letter of support for the legislation, and it was, I mean, it was profound. It was a fully articulated letter saying that we need to keep hand-marked paper ballots and have ballot marking devices here in the state, and that the North Carolina NAACP had been aligned with that issue. And I was just so impressed with his courage and just his honesty. And his strength. And I just deeply admire him and was very grateful to him for the support that he provided. And I'm really, really sorry to know that he's gone. And I welcome anybody else to share their memories.
I got one. I remember he had a hot take in one of his election commission meetings, and he channeled some scripture, Perry. He said, I read a little Greek. I read a little Hebrew, but I don't read no barcode.
That's a good one.
He was
That's a great one.
With the issue, he was like, I don't read no barcode.
It's a good one. We need to keep that one alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lulu, I'll say, you know, Reverend Barber in that eulogy, which was so beautiful. I encourage people to go online and listen to all of it. It was tremendous. But what was I gonna say? I'm blanking. I know. Yeah, sorry, it's gone. I'll come back on.
Reverend Lee, do you want to share?
Yeah, I don't even think I have anything. I think everybody has so eloquently placed the puzzle pieces together of who he is. Bennie, I heard you say that he was a disarming presence, and I think that that's such a good way to put it, and really just the epitome of like really just a good together, like on top of it person, who was also like willing to show like shortcomings and admit that like things aren't perfect, but like we're still striving regardless. And so that for me, because I also heard it mention like women in the church as well. And that is one that I didn't really speak to, but like his advocacy for that is something like to be commended, I think, in a day and age where that is still problematic in a lot of places. places. So yeah, I mean, I'm just for it. Like, you know, so many random memories. Like one time we lost his cufflinks at this conference, and he's walking around looking for this lion head cufflink. Like, darling, I need you to help me find this cufflink because it matters. And we know how he is about his dress and his clothes. He's like, I cannot lose this cufflink. So all the serious things, but also all the funny things, all the heartwarming things about Dr. Spearman. I was just really glad to be able to hold space here together with people who knew and loved and still love him.
Yeah. Lulu, I do remember. So Reverend Barber was talking about A&T University, and Dr. Spearman was not afraid to go against his own party. You know, for all of North Carolina boards, there are 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans, and they're, you know, they vote on where these voting sites are going to be. And until Dr. Spearman got on that board, nobody really pushed for those voting sites on A&T University. And even his, the other 2 Democrats on that board, even the morning that he passed and he didn't make it to that meeting, neither of those Democrats voted for that voting site. And so had even a single Democrat voted for that voting site on A&T, that voting site would have happened, because it has to be a unanimous vote, and it would have gone to the state, and the state in the past had voted to have the site on campus. And so, you know, he wasn't afraid to go against his own party for what was right. And I think that's something that that's hard to do, and he did it so courageously.
Yeah, that's what made me tear up. I was thinking about, like, it's tough work, but he did not shy away from it. Didn't shy away from it one bit.
Yeah.
I think that's a good transition. I just do want to talk a little bit about his death. So he died in July of 2022 from a gunshot wound, and the autopsy report came out just recently on February 14th. And what the autopsy report, or the medical examiner, is alleging is that this was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. But I know that I certainly do not believe that, and I am not alone. I spoke with one of his closest friends, Reverend Dr. Brown, extensively this morning, and his best friend does not believe that. His family does not believe that. And we do believe that there needs to be further investigation. And there was even details, like, Lynn, you were mentioning that you're pretty sure, well, that Dr. Spearman was left-handed. And
Nathan, I don't know. That's what I remember when I saw him writing one time, but.
Right. Well, I asked Dr. Sandler about it, and Reverend Dr. Sandler said the same thing, that he was left-handed, and we're checking with his wife, but the gunshot wound was on the right side of his head, which seems odd. And his best friend, Reverend Brown, said that there really was not an adequate investigation done. The gentleman who found the body was not adequately, asked about what he found. So there's a lot of concern about it. And I think what I talked with Dr. Brown about is maybe writing a letter, that Smart Elections might write a letter asking for a further investigation, and we might ask his friends and family and community members to sign on to that if people are open to a further investigation. I know for myself, that was the furthest thing from his energy, as far as I could tell. He was welcoming challenges. He was still ready for the fight. He did not seem in any way. I know personally people who, I have a friend actually who committed suicide, and I have counseled people, and I've been through some dark days myself. I know what the energy is when somebody commits suicide, and I absolutely never experienced that from Dr. Spearman. But I just want you to know that this is not just me saying this. I think that I have an article that came out, and I'm just going to share it for a minute. And this was an article that was in the Carolina Peacemaker, and other people said these comments. This is not just me. So this was, I'll put the link in the chat after I read this. This was on February 14th. The report came out, and this article was February 23rd, so it was very recently, about the determination of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And this is from his attorney. The findings are completely at odds with Dr. Anthony Spearman that I knew and worked with. This is Dr. Curtis Brown, who was his very best friend. I knew Dr. Spearman very well, and I talked with him the night before his death. And he talked about things that happened that haven't been investigated, that he was robbed at gunpoint, and that person hasn't been, interrogated. And he just said, that was not Anthony Spearman. That was not Anthony Spearman. And it does not align with the person I do know. So I don't know, does anybody else want to comment about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's out, like his countenance was so present. He was so well put together that, as a young Black man, he matched every qualification of the people that I would reach out to for tutelage. He was always in good spirits. I think I found out from you, Lynn, when it happened, and when you told me how, I was like, yeah, no. I mean, this is rough work. We all of us here, the further you get into the disruption of what is considered an empire, it gets dangerous. And it's been dangerous for me. It's been dangerous for Lulu. It's been dangerous for all of us, especially Lynn. So this is not outside of the realm. We're not reaching to be in disbelief. So
Yeah.
qualified there.
Yeah. I just think it runs counter to his character. If there's anything about Dr. Spearman, is that he was always in a posture of looking hopeful, of looking forward to something. And for someone to look forward to something, I know there are discouraging days, but never a day that would allow you not to continue to see forward. And that's not getting into psychology of someone who commits suicide, but I just think that runs counter to who the person is that we all know from different facets of his life. We can always come to that one common denominator, is that he was hopeful and he made us hopeful.
And I'm just going to put a few comments up. This is from Susan Greenhall, who many of us know is a longtime election security advocate, working now with Free Speech for People. And she said that conclusion is not consistent with his actions and conduct. I will support a call for investigation. So I really appreciate that, Susan, and we will be reaching out to you. And then Kelly Lane, it's so important that we talk about this. And we have some comments from his family here that I just want to be cognizant of. So grateful for you to join us. Really, really, our sympathy goes out to you fully. And this is from Cynthia Spearman Hall. Thank you so much for remembering the legacy of my brother. Please continue to pray for our family, especially his wife and children, and believe us. We are praying for him. Absolutely. And
John sent a comment that he was ready.
I see Duncan Buell asking for comments. Duncan, if you put something in the chat, I will definitely read it. Duncan Buell was an election security agent, election security expert who worked with him. You heard him mention Duncan Buell in his congressional testimony. He mentioned a bunch of other experts. I didn't have time to put all of them in there. But I know we had another one also from Cheryl McAdoo. I saw had invited quite a few people, and I wanted to thank her so much for that. Good evening. Thank you for this special celebration of the life of Reverend Dr. T. Anthony Spearman, my former pastor and beloved friend. Thank God for his life and legacy. Sorely missed. Absolutely. And I want to bring on John Brakey. We finally got him on. John, thank you so much for joining us. I know that you worked with Dr. Spearman. Do you want to say a few words about him? Yeah, you got to get your mic on. We got your video now, but we're going to need your mic too.
Can you hear me
Yes,
now? Is that better?
yes, we got you.
Very
Okay,
good.
great. Good.
Thank you.
Nope,
It's great to
not
be here
shy.
with you.
I'm
This is
fine.
a very emotional evening for me. And I'm here tonight to honor the great, late Reverend Anthony Spearman, my friend, a mentor to me. I know that I am a better person because I knew Dr. Spearman and collaborated with him closely. I arrived in North Carolina in early May of 2019, which was my 13th state to investigate elections. I came into North Carolina because of the fiasco of the Tri-County elections and the ballot harvesting scandal that affected the U.S. congressional race. In North Carolina was the first state I ever found a quad perfecta of problems. Usually I find 3. In North Carolina, there was 4. These 4 problems made me extend my stay because I knew I couldn't leave without trying to find and build a coalition to deal with these problems. A close friend of mine in Virginia, Andrea Miller, introduced me to the Reverend Dr. Rodney Sadler, who's another amazing person. And if he's listening, thank you, Reverend Sadler, for introducing me to the great Reverend Spearman. Kind of a funny story, when I met Reverend Spearman, I knew he was with the NAACP, but I didn't know that he was the president. And when I got to the hotel where they had a conference, a convention going on, I called him and he met me out front and he sat down in the lobby and we talked for 30 minutes. I probably would have been intimidated if I knew he was the president of the NAACP. Dr. Spearman was down to earth and unprecocious, a great strength that he has. We instantly bonded and made a commitment to each other to work together, and that's what we did. I spent a lot of time in North Carolina with the Reverend Spearman, Lynn Bernstein, and other people on this call. And we broke up the monopoly of ES&S in North Carolina together with his help and leadership. Dr. Spearman was on, like earlier said, was on the Guilford County Board of Election, which is the 3rd largest county in North Carolina. His county was close to making a disastrous mistake by buying election systems and software ballot marking devices rather than using hand-marked paper ballots, which is the gold standard of voting, counted on a digital scanner that created ballot images. That would have cost close to $8 million to set up the BMD system. Working as a team with a lot of people on this call, we were able to stop the BMDs and get the hand-marked paper ballots instead. That saved Guilford County $5.8 million. And by saving that $5.8 million, some schools got new air conditioners, bus drivers got raises, and there was much more money for education. That's what our collaboration did and more. Sometimes after Dr. Spearman went on to learn more and more about elections and voting system, he would call me at home when I was not in there and check on me, see how I was doing, and ask more questions and just keep learning like a sponge. He was an amazing person. We went to Florida together, and I was his sidekick, or wingman is what I like to play a lot, you know, with a strong person like Spearman, and on that. And then in January of 21, he did testify before the U.S. House of Representatives House Administration Committee that you played earlier on election security. I was honored that in his written testimony to the committee, he credited me, I couldn't believe it, with igniting his interest in learning more about voting systems, and even used the phrase he learned from me that I say to everybody, that we need elections that are transparent, trackable, publicly verified. Dr. Spearman knew that transparency in election is the currency of trust. And without it, he knew that our democracy would die in darkness, because we talked about these things. In addition to his oral testimony, Dr. Spearman submitted written testimony to the House Administration Committee. In this written testimony, he talked about meeting me, which he claimed was the beginning of him expanding his knowledge about voting systems. Dr. Spearman was unique and very spiritual individual who had a way of making people feel special. I miss my brother. I really do. I miss his phone calls. I miss missing him when I went to that last time there, a couple of weeks before this happened when I was visiting. And he was helpful to help us find lawyers in the case with Lynn Bernstein and the injustice with that. And he just encouraged us on. I miss him. And I thank being part of this and being with all of you and sharing this pain that we all have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, for that. Thank you so much. And there's a few more comments. Andrea Miller put a really wonderful note in. I loved working with Dr. Spearman. We worked together on the North Carolina 2020 election. Reverend Rodney Sadler introduced me to Reverend Spearman, and we're going to end actually with a 10-minute some comments that we pre-recorded with Reverend Sadler because he very much wanted to be with us. But
Duncan put one in there. You asked Duncan Buell to put one.
I'm going to get to Duncan, and I just wanted to. Andrea had another one because this was about our New York work. Andrea is working with us really strongly here in New York. Also, Andrea, we are so grateful for your courage and your knowledge. Andrea is such an amazing advocate. She really knows how to get things done. And she was working with Dr. Spearman with us. He called me and thanked me for writing the letter for the New York paper ballot system. I do just want to make a note because John was saying about the system in North Carolina was a hand-marked paper ballot system. It's hand-marked paper ballots and ballot marking devices because we work a lot with voters with disability and disability rights community advocates. And it is so important for us to always remember and articulate that it is very important for voters to have a choice. Some voters need a ballot marking device. Some voters choose to use one. They want like the font blown up bigger. It helps them vote. Those voters absolutely need to use ballot marking devices and they need that option. Other voters very much want to use a hand marked paper ballot and that option needs to be available and just without like having to ask for it, especially it should be part of the standard operating procedure of every polling place to have both of those options available. Dr. Spearman completely understood that. And that was what they wound up with in Guilford County and saved, it was $5.8 million that they saved with that system. It's it's more affordable to set that system up than an all BMG system, all ballot marking device. Well, we got a long one from John Bonifaz. I'm going to pop this up. Dr. Spearman was an incredible human being and I deeply miss him. I had the honor to be one of his attorneys in a case challenging the use of the unverifiable and unreliable ballot marking devices. During one difficult moment in the case, he told all of us as his counsel that 6 letters had come to him on what we should do. ITEOTS. He then deciphered it for us in the eye of the storm. I will always remember that moment and I will always remember him. I loved him. His spirit will live on. Absolutely. His spirit will live on. And we will all courageously go forward together, as he said, and make sure that we find out what happened to the best of our ability and that we do not rest until we know the truth, just as Dr. Spearman would have done for us. So we're going to play Dr. Sadler's words, and these are about 10 minutes, and then we'll close out. I'm sorry we're running a little bit over. Our cup runneth over with our love for our friend. So I think I have these comments queued up, and let's see if we can listen to these.
And it is with a mixed sense of joy and sadness that I come with you tonight to remember the life of a great man, a dear friend, a wonderful revolutionary spirit, the Reverend Dr. T. Anthony Spearman. As I think about Dr. Spearman, 2 texts stand out for me from scripture that I feel compelled to read before I get started. Revelation chapter 7, verses 9 and 10 says, "After this I looked, and there was a great multitude that no one could count from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, robed in white, with palm branches in their hands. They cried out in a loud voice, saying, 'Salvation belongs to our God, who is seated on the throne, and to the Lamb.'" The second passage I want to read is from Matthew chapter 25, just verses 31 through 40 of a much larger passage from 31 through 46 that talks about the fullness of a concern here. Simply, it says, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. Let's look to the Lord for a second, and as we do, let's pray. Holy One, we're grateful for all that you are in our lives, and I want to thank you for the life of Dr. T. Anthony Spearman, for all that it's meant, not just to me, but to so many across our state. Be with us now as we recall his life, an exemplary life, and may we follow in the footsteps that he left behind, for Christ's sake. Amen. I first met Dr. T. Anthony Spearman more than a decade ago as we both worked with the Reverend Dr. Barber in his efforts to revitalize the North Carolina NAACP. We got to be close, however, after 2013, when he and Dr. Barber began the Moral Monday movement on April 29, 2013. He and Dr. Barber went with 15 of their friends to the General Assembly building. They sang songs and prayed prayers outside the doors of the North Carolina General Assembly, surrendered themselves for civil disobedience, and were arrested for doing this innocuous event. This kicked off more than 10 weeks of protests that year and the largest movement for civil rights since the civil rights struggle to that time. I came to learn that Dr. Spearman was a diligent worker for justice, tirelessly giving his all for the cause. If there was an issue related to justice, from education to healthcare to environmental justice, to voting rights to civil rights, he was involved with it and made a point of making his voice heard about it. During this period, he also served as the president for the North Carolina Council of Churches, where he worked with various Christian denominations and others outside of the Christian faith to engage in intersectional faith-based political organizing. He never shied away from making sure that we all knew that justice work was God's work, and that we had a deep spiritual commitment to ensuring that God's will would be done in this world. Over the years, we worked more closely together, from Moral Mondays to the Executive Committee of the North Carolina NAACP. When he became the president, I continued to serve as his chair for the Healthcare Committee, and we would speak often about what we needed to do to get the North Carolina General Assembly to pass Medicaid expansion, how we could get them to do this on a moral basis. He would be the first one in the state to celebrate the fact that the North Carolina House has recently passed a version of Medicaid expansion, and he would be pushing the Senate to adopt it without delay were he here today. Dr. Spearman was always involved with voting rights issues as well. Not only a champion of voting, one who supported the suits against the state after the 2013 monster voter disenfranchisement bill that went into effect, strangely, the day after Shelby v. Holder was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. He also became a figure who symbolized the need for voter protections in our state. If I'm not mistaken, I introduced him to some of my friends who were doing national work and wanted a good connection in North Carolina. People like Andrea Miller, with whom he worked to develop voter outreach strategies. People like John Brakey, with whom he planned strategies to ensure the safety of our voting machinery. People like Barbara Arnwine, who placed him on her national board with the Transformative Justice Coalition. He was the key voice, along with Dr. Barbers, for understanding what was going on with voting in North Carolina. It was even heard on the radio and TV stations across the state, encouraging people to go and get out to vote. I chose the first passage that I read at the beginning of my thoughts because it's one that stands out most clearly when I think about Dr. Spearman. We were together on the stage at one of the first of several Moral Mondays back in 2013, and standing in front of a crowd of witnesses in the fusion justice movement. There were young people and there were older people, white people and much browner people, Poor people and wealthier people, Democrats, independents, and even Republicans standing together, singing together, cheering together, working for the same issues together. At one point during the Moral Monday, he leaned over to me and cited the Revelation chapter 7 passage and exclaimed, "This must be what heaven looks like." I suppose he's now in a better vantage to testify to the truth of his supposition. But I think it was in that moment that the spiritual dimensions of the movement that Dr. Barber and he helped to found were most evident. They had fostered beloved community, inclusive community, a shared commitment to justice that was the best expression of what the kingdom or family or the reign of God might look like in the midst of this world. The other passage I read was from Matthew chapter 25. I don't know how many times I heard him use the scripture as the basis of the work for the Moral Monday movement, as he would recite how hunger, thirst, alienation, vulnerability, sickness, and incarceration reflected the issues that we were fighting for with this campaign. This was the text that for me summed up our collective work for justice and reminded me that this was what was on Jesus's mind. More than this passage goes on to say that those who cared for those whom the world thinks of as least are those who will find an eternity with God in heaven. Knowing how much this passage and the work that it inspired were on Dr. Spearman's heart leaves me no doubt that he has found his home on high with the Lord he loves so much, and that he's still watching over each and every one of us, encouraging us to follow the Jesus he followed, to do the work that he did. I will miss my friend, Reverend Dr. Spearman, always, his deep commitments to his wife and best friend, his powerful leadership in our nation, his vegan diet that often made me a little bit uncomfortable when we broke bread together, his purple Omega Sci-Fi hat that was his trademark, his ever positive spirit that no trouble could ever take away, his deep and abiding faith in God, in Jesus, in God's justice that was the focus of his every single waking hour from 5 a.m. to the time he laid down when he went to sleep. I will miss all these things about him. I will also miss his friendship and that time I got to spend with him listening to he and Dr. Barber and Reverend Curtis Brown, Reverend John Mendez, Reverend Nelson and Mother Joyce Johnson, Al McShirley, Reverend Jimmy Hawkins, all of them telling stories, laughing and plotting good trouble. We lost a true social justice warrior general when he left us far too soon. And he will be missed always, though his rich legacy will certainly continue in all of our work. May God bless the life and work of Reverend Dr. T. Anthony Spearman, AME Zion pastor, Moral Monday founder, North Carolina Council of Church president, North Carolina NAACP vice president, then president, voting rights advocate extraordinaire, husband, father, friend, brother, and may his memory always be a blessing in Jesus' name. God bless you all.
So thanks very much to Dr. Sadler for recording that for us and for sharing his thoughts with us. Here's I think a quote from Duncan to close us out. His commitment was total. It was huge. His work was fundamental to improving what was happening in North Carolina and around the country. You know, he really, he did so much for so many people in so many causes. So we're going to say goodnight now. I'm going to thank each of you for being here with us. And Bennie and I are going to close out and let people know how to learn more about us. Thank you all. We are so, so very grateful to you for sharing your thoughts and your feelings and your love for Dr. Spearman. If you want to learn more about us or connect with us or support us financially with donations, we do need your help and support to do this work, whatever it might be. If you want to email us that you want to get involved in the fight in your state for election protection, we want to connect with you. So go ahead and contact us, contact@smartelections.us, or just go to our website, smartelections.us, and take a look there and learn more about what we do. Bennie, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks a lot. I'm glad you did this one. This one's really good.
I'm glad to. Thanks so much to everybody who joined us and for all of your beautiful comments that you shared in the chat. There's Virginia Martin. Thank you for this. And it's Dr. Spearman. And we do too. All right. Good night.